Over the last few weeks, we've been going through a series called Making Change, and it is a series focused on us getting financially healthy. And I want to make clear, guys, I want you to be financially healthy, but I want you to know why we get financially healthy. I don't want you to just come to church and say, man, I learned so much about money. Now I know how to spend money. Now I know what to do with money. And then you use it for the wrong purpose. It's all about knowing how to glorify God with our finances like every other area of our life. And here's what I want you to know. If I'm a Christian, and I tell my coworkers I'm a Christian, and I tell people I believe in God, I should be an example in how to use money, how to use things, how to live my life. We should be exemplary in every area of our life, including finances. So over the last 2 weeks, we've been going through some different stages. We started with less is more and why it is that we think we need more stuff, but the more stuff we get, the more stressed out we get. And last week, we talked about why stress is bad and how we can combat stress. Today, we're going to talk about why giving is good. Why does it feel so good for me to give gifts to people at Christmas? Why is it that I enjoy giving people nice things? And then next week, we will focus on why tomorrow matters and how we can plan for the future. But today, I want to talk to you about the fact that giving is good. And most of you already know this. I remember when I was a little kid, maybe you do too. Remember the first time you got your mom something real nice for Christmas and you've been receiving all of these nice things and asking for things, and then finally you had a little bit of dough stashed up to get mom something special. Now, I don't know about your mom, but my mom was a really good actress, you know what I'm saying? She would always say, oh, that is so sweet, it's so incredible. And I said, I know, I did such a good job. I feel incredible, thanks, Mom. I was an only child, so I always got all the attention, all right? But look, when you're a kid and you finally get to get something nice for someone, it feels so good. Why? Because we were created to not just consume, but to create and to give back. And there's this thing inside of us that we enjoy giving, and most of us, the problem isn't that we don't want to give. It's that we have a misinterpretation or a misalignment on what giving looks like, or we think, I'll give when I have X amount. Here's the truth. There are some of you in this room, you're like, I'll give when I get here. And there's somebody else in this room that they're saying the same thing, but their here is where you are. Right? They're saying, if I had what they had, I'd give. And you're saying, well, if I had what they had, I'd give. And you're saying, well, if I had what they had, I'd give. And some of you are like, if I got in the top 10% of earners, I'd give. Or you say, if I got in the 1%, man, I would give. And a lot of us, we play this game, right? You know you play the game. You drive by the big lotto sign, like $100 million. What would I do with that? And you say, I don't need 100. So what I'd do, I'd give 20 million away right away. But the second you find a $100 bill, you don't give $20 of that away, right? We always think we'd be so generous when we have more of something. Here's what you need to understand. Money is an augmenter. It makes you more of what you already are. If you're a bit of a turd to people with no money, you're going to be a real jerk when you get a lot of money, all right? Because you're going to finally think you've arrived and you can treat people however you want. If you're super generous with nothing, you'd give people the shirt off your back, and I don't mean you to say that, you do it. You're constantly caring for people, taking people out to eat, spending money on them, and blessing them and praying for them. Look, if somebody gave you $1 million, I know where that $1 million is going to go, because your money's already shown everybody where it's going. You've already not just talked the talk, you've walked the walk. I want to read you a couple of Bible passages, and some of them, when we read them, you're going to be like, yeah, that's great. And some of them, when we read them, you're going like, man, I don't like that so much. Here's the truth. Jesus talked about money more than anything else. Why? Because he knew money was this thing that we use. We have to learn how to use it as a tool, but if we're not careful, it begins to use us. Proverbs 11, verse 24 and 25. Read with me what the proverb says. One gives freely, and yet grows all the richer. And another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. The stingy person, he says, look, they think they're going to have more by being stingy, but they actually have less. You've been around some people that they're generous, and yet God continues to bless them. Verse 25, whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and the one who waters will himself be watered. I want to remind you, Proverbs are proverbs, all right? They are not promises, they're proverbs. They happen most of the time. There are certainly cases where you can say, well, this person did this. It's a proverb. It means most of the time, this is how it works. And most of us can name somebody who, when they're generous, God continues to bless them, and things just seem to fall in their favor. People want to be around them, and so they get better jobs, they get better contracts, they get better things because they are generous and loving to people. This is not just true of money, guys. This is true of your words. Some of you just want me to tell you how to invest your money. Some of you need to learn how to invest your words. When you begin investing words in people, man, you will be blessed, it will return, and it will not return void. But some of us just want to know how to make more money instead of how to make more friends, how to make people around us feel encouraged, and that's the reason when you invite people to church, they don't want to come with you because you've been investing your words in the wrong places. So notice with me in Luke chapter 6 how Jesus approaches this topic. He says, give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put in your lap. For with the measure you will use it, will be measured back to you. Now, I always want to make this disclaimer, an asterisk here. We do not preach the prosperity gospel at our church. We never have and we never will. As long as I'm the pastor here, we're not going to do that. I would never look you in the face and say, hey, when you give, God's going to bless you with more money. No, there are plenty of people who have given and God hasn't blessed them with money because that wasn't what they needed. I'm reminded of a story of a lady who said, look, I began tithing at my church and God didn't bless me. I didn't get a raise. He didn't bless me with more money in the bank. I didn't go to the bank and there was suddenly more money there. Everything was exactly the same. Our car still ran, all those things. She said, but spiritually, I began to grow. My faith began to grow. My husband and I, we began to grow in our faith. And it didn't affect us financially. It blessed us spiritually. And then it poured over into our emotional health. And it poured over into our marriage, which is actually where we needed the most help. Guys, some of you don't need God to give you more money. You've got another problem area in your life that you actually need more blessing than God just to bless you tit for tat, dollar for dollar. All right? So this whole sow your seed, that always leads to one person getting wealthy. And it's the guy saying it. All right, so I don't preach that around here. I don't need your money. We don't play that game. That prosperity gospel is a false gospel, and it only works in wealthy nations where people of wealth take advantage of the poorest in that wealthy nation who have some money to throw at them. All right, so we don't preach that. So what Jesus is not saying is, hey, y'all give me some of your coin. I'm going to give you some more. No, he actually looked his disciples in the face that it's going to get worse. Some of you are going to die. You're always gonna be on the run. Some of you are gonna be crucified, and it happened, all right? So the prosperity gospel didn't land well with James, with John, with Peter, with those guys, because it's bunk. They knew that money wasn't the source of everything. As a matter of fact, many of them left wealthy businesses. They owned fishing boats. Can you imagine being so rich you have boats? Boats, multiple boats. Do y'all know how expensive boats are? Do you know how expensive it is to work on a boat? They had lots of boats, and they left all that behind. They had an income-producing business, and they said, that's not what life's all about. I want something more. All right? And then in Acts chapter 20 and verse 35, Luke reminds them what Jesus had said, in all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak. Remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. You know that feeling? When you're finally able to give to someone who's been blessing you and it feels so good. Not like paying off a loan, not like buying something nice for yourself, but the act of giving and expecting nothing in return. So I want you to understand, giving is good, but I want to throw some asterisks, some qualifiers behind it this morning. So number one, I want you to see giving is good, but giving is good when it grows my faith. Read with me what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19. He says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust and doth and destroy and decay and where thieves break in and steal. He says, guys, look around. The birds of the air, they don't care what's going on. God provides for them. The lilies of the valley, they don't care what's going on, and they look better than Solomon arrayed in all of his glory. God is going to take care of you. You need to learn to trust God and not just trust stuff. And some of them were coming out of wealthy backgrounds. One of them was a tax collector. He had lots of money. Can you imagine if the tax collecting worked today like it worked back then? Most of us, our taxes are taken out of our paycheck. Not back then. One day someone would just show up at your house and say, hey, I'm here for a third of your income. I'm here for a third of what you brought in this week. I mean, that would get dicey. And this guy would be carrying a lot of coin around with him. And these guys were following Jesus. And he was saying, guys, you've come out of a wealthy background, some of you. Some of you not so much. Some of you are like me. You're a carpenter's son or something. But look, don't place your faith in something that can be taken, that can rust, that moths can eat up. And we like to think that because we're in the 21st century that our money is much safer than theirs, right? Well, we don't carry cash. All of our money's in the bank, and it's safe. And my money's invested in stocks, and it's safe. Everything's good. Everything's fine. Until you begin to watch people freak out every time the market changes any little bit. We, like them, are driven by fear. We're humans. And so we tend to do whatever we can to feel safe and secure. And he said, don't lay up for yourselves treasure where it can be taken from you. I've shared this story many times, and I don't remember the last time I shared it here. Around 2007 and 2008, my wife and I we were just out of college. We had just gotten married about a year or two, and I was working 2 part-time jobs to help plant a church in Suffolk, Virginia. And like most 22-year-olds, we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of income, and we were struggling to make ends meet. And I was really struggling to depend on God and while also work at this church plant. I don't know if you guys know how churches work, but when a church is new and small, typically one or two people do a lot of the work and a lot of the heavy lifting. I wasn't the lead pastor, so the church couldn't afford to pay me much at all. And so I wasn't just in charge of the youth. I was in charge of music, planning, and we had a trailer we'd have to set up. I mean, it was a busy schedule, and more the church needed me, but they couldn't really afford to pay me. And so I had to get rid of one of my part-time jobs. And I had 2 part-time jobs. One of them was at the airport at night, moving mail between FedEx, which I now work for, and a local, and the USPS, And we were like a third party, making sure everything was good. And it was a good job, but it was from 7 p.m. or 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. Those were the shifts. That was all they offered. It was good money at night, good for me back then. It was $14.50 an hour. My other part-time job was at FedEx in the mornings, and it was only $10 an hour. And I'm going to be real with y'all, I needed that $4 an hour. Had to have it. Couldn't afford not to. But I wasn't getting any sleep. I was getting in at 3 a.m., then go to my other job at 5 a.m. and trying to sleep during the day and also be a part of this church that was growing, and it was hard. And so I prayed, and I said, God, I'm going to have to get rid of a job, and I think I'm going to have to get rid of the one that pays more, the one at night. And I said, I don't want to do this. We're going to need the money, but I'm going to trust you. And we had been giving. My wife and I, we've always given to the church. We've always tithed, been faithful. And I said, God, we've been faithful, and I know you're going to take care of us. I don't know how, but you're going to. So I put my 2 weeks notice in at that night job, and I had a lot of friends there, and it was hard. My supervisor actually cried and gave me a hug, and I wasn't ready for that. And I was like, what do I do here? Oh, no. And it was really, it was rough. And so I kept going to the morning job, and I had to pick up more hours in the morning. But what I loved was it got me out of bed early. I had to be there at 5 or 6 in the morning, and I'd get off. And I remember the first day I got off, and I didn't have to go home and take a nap for the night job. And I was like, I got the rest of the day. I can go work on church stuff. I just felt like a grown-up. You know what I'm saying? It was so freeing. 2 weeks after I quit my nighttime job, my supervisor, actually the general manager at the FedEx branch, back then FedEx National, he called me and he said, Mark, I've got some changes coming. I just thought we'd let you know. You've been at $10 an hour. You've been doing good. We're realigning everything, and starting next week, everybody's getting a raise, and you're going to go from $10 to $14.50 an hour. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, $14.50. It's just the number they came up with. And I told him the story. I said, I know what's going on here. Like, I can depend on God. I needed that. And it was like God was saying, hey, Mark, you're doing what I want you to do. I'm going to take care of you. Don't you worry about it. A couple years later, that job actually offered me benefits. I still work there. I go in from time to time. Like, y'all know, you've heard me talk about before, I love my job at FedEx. The church, like I work for the church full time, but I love going into FedEx. I only go in a few hours a week. They got my benefits, my dental, all these things. God has given me a great little job that I was scared to hold on to because I needed that $4.50 an hour. You know what I'm saying? Guys, it's really good when you can depend on God and you can have faith in God. And when you give, you show God, I'm depending on you. Some of you struggle with giving your whole life, and then what you're struggling with is really depending on God and believing that He not only will come through, but may reveal to you, hey, you don't need this junk you keep paying for. You don't need these things as much as you need to learn to depend on me. I hope y'all know when I talk about money, I try my best to do this with humility, but I want you to hear what I'm going to say. My wife and I don't worry about money these days. God has been very, very good to us. We've never made great money. We've just been very careful, and God has blessed us. Every time we move, we hold on to the house we bought and we rent it out, and we've got properties that are paying for themselves and plus some now, and God's been really good to us. You want to know why? I can depend. I have faith in God, and I've seen Him take care of me, and I've seen Him take care of me in such a way where I now depend on Him in such a way where I'm willing to take bold risks, because I'm telling you what, God's got me. Not because of me, not because I'm good, because He's good. Hey, I've let Him down. I've screwed up. God has always been there for us. A few years later, my wife and I, we were giving to that church, and they were raising money for a building, and so we raised our giving by 50%, and it was hard, man, writing that check, and we didn't know if we were going to, we did it for an entire year, and that was incredibly stressful for us in our mid-20s. We still weren't making great money, and you know what? God provided for us that year. He provided for us the next year, and now we're able to give in ways we never would have dreamed of. Why? Because we didn't wait until we had some money to start giving. You feel me? Like, we were faithful with what God provided. So giving is good when it stretches my faith, but it's also good when it combats materialism. I don't want you to just say, well, I just want to learn to depend on God. Giving is the antidote to materialism. We live in a world that is wrapped up in materialism, right? I can't log on to social media. I can't get on the internet. I can't watch TV without wanting something. And I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. Y'all, I love my truck when I'm camping, but when I come back into Wi-Fi, when I get back online, when I get back into where TVs are in front of me, I need a new truck. They are so good at marketing. marketing. They are so good at advertising. I'll be driving down the street, and they don't even need to throw out a commercial at me. I'll just see one. Oh, look at that truck, right? Because when we aren't completely inundated with marketing and ads, we're not so inclined. I love my truck when I'm camping and I don't see other trucks, but when I see other things, I want them. It's human nature. Paul wrote to Timothy this way in 1 Timothy chapter 6. He said, I want you to learn how to combat materialism. As for the rich in this present age, challenge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, right? Don't just want stuff and things. By the way, there's nothing wrong with stuff and things. We use them, but we don't let them use us. We don't let them possess our hearts. We don't let them possess our minds. And I want you to hear me. This is something your pastor struggles with. If I'm not careful, what develops in my head and what I spend most of my time focusing on is a truck I like or a boat I'd like or something instead of someone. Instead of someone. You hear me? We're not here for stuff. We're here for people and to love God and honor God. He says, look at this, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. It's amazing how much more we can enjoy this life when we're not bound by things. Some of you are strapped because of all the stuff you've bought. You've got debt tied up in it. You can't get away from it. And the stuff you thought would make you happy is now a weight around your ankle. He says, I want you to take hold of real life. And it's not more stuff. It's understanding how to use stuff and what it does and how it can work. Notice this, verse 18. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Verse 19, thus storing up for themselves treasure as a good foundation for the future, so they may take hold of that which is truly life. Materialism says to you and me all the time, if I have that, I will really be alive. Jesus says you don't need stuff to truly be alive. You need to enjoy real life, true joy, real emotional connection with God and others. True living is not found in the stuff we see, right? And so we want to combat this idea of materialism. And here's the truth. Some of you already see it with your kids. And so you need to learn to teach them. Whenever I feel like selfish, I need to learn to be sharing. I need to give because they work against each other. The more I take, the more I spoil myself, the less inclined I am to give. Vice versa. The more I give, and I don't just mean to church, I mean generous to my coworkers, paying for other people's meals, going out of my way to be generous to people who could never pay me back, the more it combats that selfishness. So the more I can combat selfishness, it makes not only giving good, but it affects my heart. And as Paul wrote in 1 Timothy, it sets up a secure foundation. But then I want you to see this. This is where a lot of bad teaching and giving comes along. Giving is good when it's not alone. Here's my problem with a lot of Christians. We got some bad teaching that I want to debunk and talk about in this passage specifically here in just a second. Some Christians think this way. They think, well, I give, and therefore I don't have to do the other Christian things. Pastor, I pay the bills around here, so I don't need to go to group. I don't need to be on a serve team. My serving is giving to this church. You will not find a passage in Scripture where it says one gift means you don't have to do the other gifts. Where it says doing one thing absolves you from having to do the other things. And by the way, giving ain't going to get you into heaven. This is something we do out of love and to honor God. It's not something that gets us points with God. It's more about us changing our view of money and stuff. I want you to read Matthew chapter 23 and verse 23 with me. And notice what Jesus says. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin. Now they tithed. And this is the T word that a lot of Christians don't like to talk about. They tithed. So much so that they got down to the minuscule things. They didn't just tithe the big things. We're talking about their spices. If somebody gave them spices, they would shave off 10% and bring it to the church. They were that minuscule in their giving. They were those people who were looking at every dime they brought in. And they were like, look, God, I gave exactly 10%. But he said, you've neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done, comma, without neglecting the others. Whole bunch of people like to say Jesus said tithing doesn't matter. No, Jesus said do tithing, but not on its own. That's not all we do as a church. We aren't just here to give, we're here to serve. We aren't just here to give, we're here to grow. We aren't just here to... Some of us, if we're not careful, we'll buy into this theology of, well, the more I give, the less I have to do. I must have arrived as a Christian. Jesus said, you have neglected the weightier matters of justice, of mercy, and of faithfulness. Guys, we do not serve in either or. We serve a both and. God, he says, I want you to be generous, but I also want you to be just. I also want you to be merciful and to be faithful. This is the tension of Christianity because we love either or. I'll do this or I'll do this. And so what we say is, well, I can't afford to give, so I'll just give lots of time, or I'll just give lots of resources that I find, or I'll just spend And God says, no, this is for you. You're never going to have enough time. You're never going to have enough talent. You're never going to have enough treasure. You're never going to have enough. I want you to stretch yourself and really trust me. So this morning, I want to close with some practical tips, and you're going to not like them at all. You're not going to like them at all, and that's okay. My job, my role as a pastor is to equip you for the work of ministry, but also to train you in God's word to help you understand, and also to point out, hey, some areas where we can grow. And I want you to hear me. I've done all these things. These are things that I'm currently doing, and I'm currently growing in. Some of us treat tithing like it's this when I get there, and tithing was the base level in the scriptures. Like, there are people in our church, they don't tithe. They've gone past tithing years ago. They try to be as generous as they can, and they don't just give to church. They give to the church, and then they give to local organizations for the homeless. They really give all they can, and they pray every year to grow in their giving. They don't pray every year for more money, you hear me? They pray every year to grow in their giving. You know what's going to have to happen for them to grow in their giving? Either they're going to need to make more money, or they're going to say no to some things that they really like. Boy, if that's not a model of Christianity, I don't know what is. So here's 3 things that I always tell people when you want to wrestle with this idea of giving. Number 1, how to grow in my giving. Number 1, trust God with the tithe. Trust him with the tithe. I've challenged people to do this for years, and here's what I always say. If I can trust God with my soul. Now, if you're here this morning, you're not a believer, do not do this. This is not something you need to do until you're a believer. You're a follower of Jesus. But if you're a follower of Jesus, we believe we can trust him with our soul, with our marriage, with our kids. I'm just telling you, 10% of my is nothing. You say, why 10%? God put it there because he knew it was hard, but it was attainable. He knew it was difficult. There's none of us would walk around and be like, man, what can I give 10% to? Like, who could I give 10%? Most of us are saying, man, if I could just save 10% for myself, because we've allowed the world to tell us how to spend money, how to use money, and most of us aren't saving. I've been through this with you guys as a church numerous times. We're actually going to have an FPU big night, not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday night. So about 10 days from now, we're going to have a live stream of an FPU night where they go through the 7 steps of getting financially free and paying off debt. And if you want to come, it's one of the few times that Financial Peace University is free. I know it's crazy, but we're going to host it here. If you're interested, it'll not be this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. And one of the things I always talk about is you want to get to the place where you can give, you can save, and you can live on less than you earn. If you're going to give and save, you have to learn to live on less than you earn. So 3 things I say. Number 1, trust God with the tithe. And I mean this, like, really trust him. I remember years ago, my wife and I, when we got married, we said, we're going to give, and then I had a hospital bill hit us. We said, we're going to give, and we weren't making any money. I was working 2 part-time jobs, but we're going to give. And you know what? For the first probably 18 months of our marriage, we lost more money than we brought in. And what I mean by that is our savings dwindled as our giving continued. And I said, Lord, if we run down to here, there's not going to be anything in there. I got out of college. We paid off some things. And it's held steady for a few years. You get a little older, you get a few raises, and suddenly we were able to not only give, but save. And then we were able to raise how much we save and raise how much we give. And God has been good to us. I'm not saying it's been easy. Most of the people I talk to who want to know about real estate or money or investing, they want me to give them a 10-minute answer that took me 10 years to figure out. They want me to give them a 10-day turnaround for their money that's going to take at least 10 months to see any movement whatsoever. But isn't that how we treat God? Oh, Jesus, fix my marriage, and please do it by the end of today. Oh, God, free me from the desires of my flesh, and if you could do it by next Wednesday, that'd be great. And God is more interested in us following a plan and a process that grows us, that strengthens our faith in him, that leads to our dependence on him. Number 2, I'd encourage you to pray over your giving. I'd encourage you to do this whether you're tithing, whether you're giving, whether you're not giving at all. Pray over it. Pray about it. Say, God, what is it you would have me to give? And then number 3, start where you are. And that's the verse I want to read, another misconstrued passage about giving. In Luke chapter 21, there's a story that you're familiar with. I've heard this story misused by people who want to say that God doesn't care about giving, or he doesn't look at it the same way we do, or the same way that the church does, or the scriptures. Notice verse 1. It says, Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. He's at church, synagogue in that day. Verse 2, and he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. He saw like some people come in and drop some big heavy checks. You know what I'm saying? The kind that they have to linger as they give it. Hey, you see that? You see that, Pastor? And then he saw this lady put in 2 copper coins, literally the bare minimum, next to nothing. It's not much at all. Verse 3, he said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. Verse 4, for they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty. I've heard so many people say put in what she could. That's not what it says. She did not put in what she could. There's a lot of us Christians who are like, well, this is what I can't. I want you to notice what it says she did. She out of poverty put in all she had to live on. Back then, this was the closest thing to a government program that they had. It was common for these widows to receive 2 widow's mites. A pastor friend of mine actually gave me a widow's mite from that era. I have it at my home. It's very, very small. It's just a little copper coin. And he said what would happen is the government would give these ladies 2 of these a day. It was barely enough to get any food. And that was all she had. That was her living for the day. It was all she had to live on. And that's what she put in, verse 5. And while some were speaking of the temple and how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, I want you to notice our Savior. When everyone else is caught up with beautiful buildings and facades and stained glass windows and stones and steeples, Jesus is focused on the little old lady who just gave in her living, and they are focused on how they can use this money to build more stuff. God forgive the church. God forgive the church when all we want to do is use money to get more stuff. Verse 6, he says, as for these things that you see, the days will come when they will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Guys, here's the truth. I want you to hear me. Like Jesus said it, it's still true. Look around. This wonderful facility that we finally have as a church, and we can come in when we need. We don't have to unload the trailer. I want you to hear me. If Jesus tarries his returning, there'll be a day when moth and rust will destroy this building. This building is not our church. We do not need more stuff. We need more of what Jesus took note of. Real faith in that lady's life. Man, she gave all that she had to live on. She started where she could. There was no way she could ever give what those guys next to her gave. What those people put in before her would blow her mind. But she put in what she had to live on. She started where she was, and where she was, she threw in everything. Every one of us, maybe we had 2, we're like, all right, I'll do one. She did both. And Jesus got excited about the generosity and the giving that he saw in her life. Guys, I want you to hear me. I want to challenge you to start where you are, to trust God enough to take him at his word and know that the first month, you're not going to find more money in the bank account. Things aren't going to get suddenly better. I'm not preaching to you that things are going to get better financially for you because you started giving. I'm telling you, your faith will grow. Your desire for stuff will shrink because you'll realize, man, I could have done this with that, but instead I did something that mattered. At the end of the year, every year we send out our giving statements to those who give. And when we get it, a lot of people in our church, they get it. And there's a large amount on there. And I remember the first time that there was a large amount, I said, man, the things we could have done with this. I looked at my wife, I said, we could have bought this. We could have done that. And it hit me. And then I'd have to be responsible for that thing, washing that thing, insuring that thing, caring for that thing. But instead I gave to something that's going to go on a lot longer than me. That year I was part of a church getting into their building years ago. The next year I was a part of a missionary going to a foreign land and preaching the gospel and souls being saved that eternity has changed. Guys, I want you to see how you can use money and not allow money to use you. But the question simply becomes, are we willing to trust God enough with the one thing that often we don't trust anybody with? We're nervous about our bank, our investment guy, the government certainly, our employer. God says, I want you to trust me with that thing you think you can't trust anybody with. Would you pray with me this morning?